The Man in the Tunnel. In the early 2000s, Sam was a college student living in a small town in Pennsylvania, known for its history and the countless urban legends that swirled around the area. He never believed in ghost stories or the supernatural. He was more focused on his studies and part-time job at a local gas station. But there was one story that always intrigued him, a story that many locals knew but avoided talking about, the story of the man in the tunnel. There was an old railway tunnel just on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades. It was a place people avoided after dark. Some said it was haunted by the ghost of a man who had been crushed in a construction accident. Others said strange things happened in the tunnel's sounds, shadows, and whispers that couldn't be explained. Sam, skeptical by nature, had heard the stories but never paid them much attention. One night, after a long shift at work, Sam's friend, Mark, dared him to go to the tunnel. It was nearly midnight, the perfect time for a ghost story, Mark joked. "Come on, let's see if the legend is real," Mark teased. "Unless you're scared." Sam wasn't one to back down from a dare. "All right, let's go," he said, shrugging it off. It wasn't like he had anything better to do, and it'd make for a funny story to tell their friends. They grabbed their flashlights and drove out to the tunnel. The road leading there was deserted, winding through thick woods with no streetlights. The only sounds were the hum of the car engine and the wind rustling the trees. As they neared the tunnel, even Mark's light-hearted attitude seemed to fade. The tunnel itself was long, dark, and seemed to swallow any light that touched it. The stone entrance was cracked and overgrown with weeds. An old sign stood at the edge, rusted and faded, warning people to keep out. "Looks pretty creepy," Mark admitted, his voice quieter now. Sam shrugged, pretending not to feel the same creeping unease. "It's just an old tunnel, probably full of rats and graffiti." They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the pitch black. The tunnel stretched far into the distance, the end lost in darkness. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls. But otherwise, it was eerily silent. No wind, no night animals, just the heavy, oppressive quiet. Halfway through the tunnel, Mark stopped. "You hear that?" Sam paused, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the echo of their breathing. Then, faintly, the sound of footsteps, distant but steady. They both turned their flashlights in the direction they'd come from, but the entrance was long gone, swallowed by darkness. "It's probably just an echo of our own footsteps," Sam said, though his voice wavered. They continued walking, but the footsteps seemed to follow, growing louder as if someone or something was walking right behind them. Sam spun around, flashing his light down the tunnel. It caught nothing but damp stone walls and empty space. "Let's keep moving," Mark muttered, his bravado gone. As they neared the end of the tunnel, the footsteps stopped, but a new sound emerged low, heavy breathing. It wasn't theirs. Both Sam and Mark froze, shining their lights in every direction. The tunnel was empty, but the breathing continued, slow and steady, like someone standing just behind them, invisible in the dark. "I'm done with this," Mark whispered, his face pale. "Let's get out of here." They quickened their pace, almost running now, the light at the end of the tunnel finally in sight. But just as they were about to reach the exit, Sam's flashlight flickered and died. He cursed, hitting it a few times to bring it back to life. That's when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a man's voice, a low, garbled whisper echoing off the tunnel walls. "Don't leave." Sam's heart stopped. He glanced at Mark, whose wide eyes confirmed he'd heard it too. Without a word, they bolted for the exit, sprinting as fast as they could. They didn't stop, until they reached the car, panting and drenched in sweat. When they finally felt safe enough to speak, Mark looked at Sam with a mixture of fear and disbelief. That wasn't our imagination, right? Sam shook his head, his hands still trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. No, that was real. They drove back in silence, neither of them mentioning the tunnel again. But from that night on, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them out. He would hear strange noises at night, faint whispers when he was alone, footsteps in the hallway when no one else was home. It wasn't long before Sam packed up and moved out of town, leaving the legend of the tunnel behind. Years later, he still wonders what would have happened if they'd stayed in the tunnel a moment longer. But some things, he realized, are better left unexplained.